All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We're going to give it just a minute or two to make sure that everybody is connected before we get started. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this month's EUC Elevate webinar hosted by World of EUC. And today we have Jamie Halscott from IGEL joining us to talk about rethinking your Windows 11 migration and how IGEL can help with that. So, Jamie, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sean. This is great. Of course, I'm the second most important person on this call after your cat today. The cat is so much cooler than I am, so I'm just going to try my best here to not upstage too much. But yeah, really great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're going to kind of step through the presentation here. Something that I hope we'll get a lot out of, and see if we can't talk a little bit here about what we want to do. So what are we really doing here, right? We're rethinking our Windows 11 migration strategy. And as Sean mentioned, my name is Jamie Halscott. I'm the Senior Technology Evangelist for IGEL. I'm aligned to the Global Alliances team, which is our partners, independent software partners, hardware partners, as well as the IGEL Ready program. So building out an ecosystem on the desktop side of the IGEL OS product suite. So Windows 11 migration, right? Why does this really matter to us? Why do we care about getting to Windows 11? Well, we kind of had our hand forced on this one. This is something that has been pushed on us by Microsoft, for lack of a better term. Uh, Windows 10 support ends, and it doesn't even end at the end of the year. It ends before that. Now they've backpedaled a little bit. We've got some questions about how much pay to play you really can do. But I thought this was funny that this was from the mildly infuriating subreddit, where people have kind of vented about this. It came up today when I was looking through things. And really, we were told Windows 10 was the last version of Windows. There wasn't going to be another one. So now here we are, flash forward, several years after Windows 11's release, and most folks still haven't gotten there. We found a very large amount of customers running, particularly in the business world, haven't for a variety of different reasons. Those can be application compatibility, those can be hardware compatibility. So we're going to talk about some of those and how do we really mitigate those. Well, what are your options, right? Number one is replace Windows 10 systems with Windows 11 systems, right? And that's a straight install and do things. But again, you have to have some support on that, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Second one is just wholesale replace them, right? Take your Windows 10 machines, throw them away, burn them, do anything. Actually, you should be doing responsible e-recycling and things on those. But that's an expensive proposition, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The other option really is, do we even really need Windows at the endpoint? Can you replace it with something else, right? Obviously, that's going to be a big piece of my presentation today. And then, of course, the fourth one, I think, is the one that we all really, truly embrace, right? That's just giving up IT completely. Just become a hermit, go embrace nature, live in the woods, shut off technology completely, right? But unfortunately, we're not all suited for that. So we can't do that. So let's talk about what these problems are and what do we want to do. So first thing we want to talk about is, right, do we want to upgrade these existing Windows 10 systems to Windows 11? Now I'm a bit of a meme guy, so I have some fun ones. Some of you might remember Seinfeld and the no soup for you. And that's what we have here, right? no Windows 11 for you. If you don't have the TPM 2.0, which is usually the major hardware stumbling block to moving from Windows 10 to Windows 11 on PCs that are older than, say, 4 or 5 years, we're finding that that's the biggest challenge here, right? And we can debate the scholarly aspects of whether or not the TPM is actually a secure option and whether it even makes sense. But either way, Windows is making that a requirement. And each subsequent release of Windows 11 that we've been seeing, any of the workarounds and hacks that have been used to install Windows 11 keep getting removed. And you're going to end up with unsupportable systems. Perfectly fine if you're a home user that's technical or you're a home labber, great. But if you're running an enterprise or a business on Windows, it's not a great idea. So what about if we can do this, right? Let's say you've got the hardware there, you've got TPM 2.0, you've got a modern processor that supports everything. Is it even worth it, right? How stable is this, right? How much worse does this really get? I have a lovely Lenovo laptop amongst the other ones that I have here. When I installed Windows 11 24H2 on it, it decided it didn't like networks anymore. The entire networking stack, wired, wireless, everything stopped working, right? And that's just one of the problems we've had with various different builds of Windows 11, particularly becoming exacerbated as we get into 24H2, newer versions of the operating system. Really starting to see a lot of challenges here with compatibility, hardware compatibility, software compatibility. Obviously, Windows 11 24H2 is now blocked on PCs running, and they say older AutoCAD software. We're not talking AutoCAD 2016, 2017. We're talking 2022, a 2, 3 year old version of AutoCAD that's in use by engineering and production and manufacturing firms all around the world simply won't run under this, and it breaks catastrophically. Even issues like webcams, Bluetooth chipsets, Windows Explorer, something that's worked fantastically since the early days of Windows, now is breaking. So we're seeing this all over the place with hardware incompatibility. So you might think this is great. I just installed Windows 11 and everything's going to be great, even if I meet the hardware requirements. We're finding that that's not really the case. And when you have an enterprise that has 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 end user computing devices, that's going to exacerbate that. It's going to be a huge problem for you going forward. Okay, great. So let's just skip ahead and say, what if we replace these Windows 10 systems with new ones, right? Comes from the factory, it's going to be supported, right? Well, we don't live in a vacuum, right? I'm not going to get political on this. This is more of a question of economics and the economic reality of what we live in. We've heard all kinds of different PC manufacturers talk about missing targets, missing numbers, increasing prices to cover things like tariffs, even when they're not even in place. We hear these discussions. So the real short of this is going to be your PC is not getting cheaper, even though you want it to be, even though we typically see tech deflation in pushing the prices down on new hardware. We're going to see a bump in this, I think, inevitably, and that's going to be a challenge for us. Okay, so let's say that we don't do that, or we don't have the budget to replace all of that. What do we do now, right? Do we look at alternatives? Okay, so let's talk about that. Do we replace Windows at the endpoint, right? What are our options, right? Do we use Mac OS? Does that work? Maybe. But when we look at Mac OS, say in an enterprise or a business environment, it's really going to have a higher cost. And you're going to have these issues where you're locked into a particular hardware vendor, which very rarely is Mac hardware competitive. It is on the low end, right? But not on the high end. It becomes a very expensive proposition. Lots of pieces that are not upgradable. A lot of the things we've come to love about the PC ecosystem, we don't have in the Mac ecosystem. There's some compatibility issues with applications. Some work great, some don't. We've had a lot of challenges with management and being able to have those enterprise device management capabilities in those types of ecosystems. Well, what about Linux, right? Linux has been around forever. It's mature, it's stable. How To Geek had a great article about this, and their fourth option with the Windows 11 migration was to embrace Linux, right, as a lightweight alternative. And that they even gave us a fun picture of our penguin with a Windows 10 tombstone. Linux is a great option, right? Before I joined IGEL, I was a CTO for about 15 years with one of the largest focused MSPs in the enterprise computing space, really focused on high availability. And we were using Linux everywhere. except at the endpoint because it's difficult to manage at the endpoint. It's easy to install, it's easy to live with, but getting users to adopt it, being able to manage it on scale is not easy. In the data center, no problem. 400 to 1, 500 to 1 Linux to Windows systems. Absolutely amazing for that. But the end user computing really hasn't taken off with Linux for a number of different reasons. One of which is strange compatibility, vendor support, really having a supportable ecosystem that works. But those are all options that we have here. And we're going to show you one with IGEL OS, of course, that's a little bit different. And then, all right, let's go with that last option, right? This was my favorite one, the give up completely, right? Do we become a hermit? Do we embrace nature? Do we go live in the woods and eat bugs? I guess we could, but either way, whatever we do here, if we get to a new version of Windows, let's say, even if we have Windows 10 going to Windows 11 and we can do it, we still have the same challenges. We're not seeing the attacks that are out there slowing down anytime soon. Ransomware attacks, malware attacks, they're becoming more widespread, they're becoming more expensive. And in order to deal with this, we're really layering on top so many different technologies from so many different vendors that leads to, again, performance issues. It leads to stability issues. If we thought it was bad enough to run AutoCAD 2022 on Windows 11 24H2. Imagine once you've layered on, your CrowdStrikes or your Zscalers or any of your other SASE or security tools on top of this, trying to make them all work together. They're tremendous solutions, but making all of them fit together is difficult. It's like building a recipe for something. And we're seeing some of the biggest vendors getting hit, right? We're seeing, groups like casinos that have some of the most hardened systems. We're seeing, Amazon Web Services getting hit with ransomware. We're seeing, Tata Technologies, huge companies getting hit with ransomware when they have the best tools and the best pieces in there. So what do we really do about this? And that's where the shameless product plug here comes today with IGEL, right? And what is IGEL? And IGEL, really our focus is on security now. And we are the secure endpoint OS for now and next. So that's what we are. We do nothing else. We are an endpoint operating system. That endpoint operating system was designed as a hardened Linux-based distribution, one that is very different from what you see in a traditional Linux distribution. We took all of the core pieces that we needed to make it run, and then we layered on top of it all kinds of different technologies that we developed ourselves to make sure that it does exactly what you want it to do. So I'm going to get into depth in that in just a little bit. But what does IGEL as a company do, right? Our whole goal here is to fix problems to make businesses work better. And we're trying to do this by saving money, right? Keeping you from buying new hardware if you don't need to, keeping you from buying additional tools and software and leveraging that on there, keeping you from having to hire additional personnel to manage, maintain, support all of those systems. We're trying to simplify and standardize that end user experience. One of the things that we'll get into in a little bit is our management framework and how we do that, how it's as easy to manage 10 systems as 10,000 systems, which really drives us into those large enterprise accounts, but gives us the same power in a small, mid-sized business. And then what we're doing here is we're supporting the key technologies that are necessary to drive the solutions that you want, right? And that can be VDI, that can be SaaS, that can be DaaS, that can be native apps running, progressive web apps, all of these different technologies that we've been able to run on IGEL OS in as secure a way as possible, so that regardless of how that application delivery strategy looks, how your end user computing strategy looks, we'll be able to support that. And then we really are first and foremost secure. We're defending that endpoint against malware and ransomware. And when we get into that here in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about why it's essentially impossible to compromise an IGEL OS endpoint. And what we're doing too is removing complexity, right? When you're, again, great solutions, we have a partner in CrowdStrike, we have partners in Zscaler, we have tremendous industry partners. They make awesome solutions, but layering so many of those on top of Windows and its millions of lines of code or tens of millions of lines of code, there's going to be problems, right? And we've seen that in the field. We've seen that realistically happen. So what we want to do is get rid of that complexity and provide some stability in this kind of evolving, challenging world that we're dealing with. So what does IGEL OS do to do that? Well, first and foremost, we have this thing that we call our preventative security model. And it's really 6 pillars that defines what the IGEL OS does. So we start out with, again, a hardened Linux-based distribution, one that has only what we need to make it run. So supporting chipsets, drivers, supporting drivers for all the different hardware that we might need, everything that we need to get the base operating system going and installed. Now, that base operating system cannot be modified. You can do nothing to make that happen. From the moment you boot this operating system, it goes through an entire series of checks, checksums, certificate validation. If anything is different, it won't load that module. Or if it's in the core operating system and it's compromised, it won't boot at all. If it doesn't validate, it doesn't boot. And so this ensures that the version of IGEL OS that you're running, the way you want it, the way you want it to look, is not compromised. It is a full checksum every time this boots. It also doesn't store any local data. So this is different from what you're used to. Even on a Linux distribution, we're not storing user data here. There's no such thing as profiles. We support identities, and those identities are supported through other mechanisms, other different IDPs that we have, which I'll talk about here in another minute. And that's it. I mean, that's the operating system. Of course, nothing can be loaded on the operating system either, except for the trusted applications that we put on there. And I'll go through our IGEL app ecosystem and what that looks like. But we encrypt everything. So if you looked at an IGEL OS disk, even though there's no local data on it, even settings and configurations, it's all encrypted. So it's useless to an attacker if they were to have the device. And again, it's modular. So that trusted application platform, only the applications we want to run are all that gets deployed. I half joke sometimes that IGEL OS doesn't do anything. It doesn't have a browser out of the box. It doesn't have a calculator, doesn't have a notepad, doesn't have anything like that. It's simply designed as a platform to put all those solutions on, only the ones you need. And it integrates with whatever authentication provider you want. Single sign-on, right? It can be Okta, Ping, Workspace ONE if you're an Omnissa customer. Azure will support that as well. So any of the Azure AD single sign-on, it's all there, and it's designed to be secure by default. So that preventive security model adds these pieces on, right? And what we tried to do here was kind of replace that legacy monitor, detect, mitigate, remediate, right? Where you know the bad guys are coming, you know something's going to happen. It's just how bad is this going to hurt? And we're trying to get rid of that. Well, that doesn't work anymore. That isn't a model that's sustainable in 2025. So what we're doing here is saying, what if we could eliminate this all right out of the box? Right? Centrally manage it, policies, updates, configuration, everything out of the box, ready to go, and even with no user intervention to get the machine set up. And that's going to help us in a lot of different ways by eliminating things like our antivirus, our EDR and XDR functions that we would normally have to purchase and license and deploy to those systems, backup and recovery systems for the endpoints, solutions like data loss prevention. We don't need that here. We don't have the ability to install things like keystroke loggers or malware that can snoop on that. We don't need a VPN client for these. Even our device back to its central management happens all through a secure WebSocket. So there's no need for a lot of those functions. We have them from our third-party vendors if you want to use them with particular solutions. If you want to use things like, say, OpenVPN or Zscaler or Cato Networks or any number of different Netscope, any different number of different strategies that you want for application delivery, we can use those. But out of the box, we really don't need that. We can leverage open and secure TLS protocols to communicate. Again, we're preventing that endpoint malware. If it's signed, it doesn't run. That's just how this works. And it's going to enable us to really fit at the endpoint as part of a larger zero trust network architecture strategy, right? That's what everything is zero trust now. We don't take anyone at their words. We want to be able to validate who they are, what device they're on, and make sure that it is exactly the way we want it to be, and that's going to be supported with IGEL OS. And again, secure service edge, SASE, UEM, identity and access management, all of that is part of this solution from our partners that we've enabled this. And so what does that do for us again? It's going to allow us to have this strategy for delivery of everything, right? In this case today, we're talking about migration from Windows 11. But if you were using, say, legacy thin clients, we replace them like Dell Thin OS. We have the ability to remove things like endpoint problems, and we enable an endpoint DR strategy. In fact, we had a medical facility, one of the universities up in Vermont, that was hit by ransomware, and they actually had deployed partial IGEL to the environment, and they were able to use it as like an endpoint disaster recovery solution to deploy the rest of it on very short order. But everything that you need here to support all of that hybrid work, we will run on any x86 64 hardware platform. We will support any number of application delivery platforms, again, VDI, DAS, and browser, and of course, enabling all of those security models that you need here. We support smart card authentication, so we've worked with large partners like Imprivata for Tap and Go, which is huge for us in the medical field, 90 meter, AuthX, and every time we continue to do this, we're adding more and more identity management providers. We don't want to be the solution for everything. We want to be the endpoint solution that fits there perfectly. So how do we get there? Well, our term that we always use is simply IGEL it, right? What does that really mean? Well, we can deploy IGEL OS in a number of different ways. One is that emergency recovery, like we talked about there. We're working on some options here for some almost easy button type functionality where you can have a Windows machine that it's compromised, you have a problem, you don't want to use it, you can boot it in IGEL OS and it runs. We have the use case for BYOD, and in both those cases, you see a little USB type device there. That's something we call a UD Pocket, and it's a full IGEL OS running on an external USB drive, serialized, ready to go. That allows us to boot IGEL OS, run it through the day. It'll be configured the way you want. It'll keep those configuration settings because those are all signed and certified. And then when you're done, you unplug it and you go back to your day. So for call center workers, remote workers, this is a tremendously powerful thing. You don't even have to send them hardware. They can plug it in. Again, it's immune from things like the keystroke loggers and other pieces that are there and malware. So they can use a truly untrusted system to work with this. Or, maybe a company issued device where we're installing either IGEL OS ourselves on a legacy x86 64 platform. Could be a laptop, desktop, doesn't matter to us. Or we have OEM partners that have provided these solutions for us, and I'll go into some of those as well. So putting the best of breed solutions together on an end-to-end supported hardware and software platform, and that's going to be locally installed. So we have really flexible options for that. Now, anyone who's done this for a long time knows that getting devices to the end user, getting them to use them, getting them to work correctly is difficult. Anyone who's tried to do an Intune enrollment with hash values and all of that knows how hard this is. It's part of the reason I left the CTO world. But we've made it extremely easy at IGEL OS to onboard. So when you first install an IGEL OS device, it steps through a wizard, and that wizard's really nice. It gives you two options. All right, it gives you an option to specify your management server, and then you can give the user a one-time password and a communication token, and it enrolls automatically. It knows where it's supposed to go. It knows what it's supposed to do. It knows what apps are supposed to get deployed to it and what their settings are. Or it's as easy if you register with the IGEL onboarding service as them using their email, right? So in our case, even at IGEL, when I first joined, I was issued a device, put my email address in, it connected to our Entra ID, everything worked, and it deployed out exactly what I needed without any intervention. I was not a local administrator, couldn't do anything else to the device. It just got it the way it was. It gives us a nice little congratulations. The device is now part of the network. It reboots. It deploys any apps that it needs with the settings that it needs, and that's it. All of which can then be changed. But again, like I talked about, we also have the option here for replacing those endpoints. So we have three really major vendors that we deal with, LG, HP, and Lenovo, all of which have a tremendous array of different thin clients, desktop type class devices for this, all-in-ones, all of those that we can use to have IGEL already pre-installed, or again, repurposing hardware. So we kind of, we have a big investment in these partners. And so one of the things that we like to say is we want to get you to a point where you're able to buy new hardware that runs IGEL OS, but you can phase that in now. So where before you may have only had, say, 18 months to make a solution fit to get away from, say, Windows 10 to Windows 11, but you don't have the budget for that. Well, we're saying now, why don't you go ahead and extend that 24 months, 36 months, 48 months, phase that in so as budget fits that you can go ahead and do that. And what do we do to really enable that? And that's where the IGEL OS kind of ecosystem comes in. And I talked about this a little bit, but what we're allowing you to do now is from our IGEL OS desktop, right, we can present you additional desktops. So if you're a VDI shop and you're using Citrix or you're using Microsoft or you're using Omnissa Horizon or you're using AWS, we don't really care. We don't care what those partners are. They're all partners of our IGEL ecosystem that have solutions ready to go right now in our IGEL App Store. So you can connect to those seamlessly from IGEL OS. Or again, you can run applications that you have natively in the cloud. So again, things like your Microsoft Teams, your GoToMeeting, if you have specific line of business applications, you can do that too. We even have our own app creator portal, which allows uh, third party customers to be able to make their own apps. So if you had an in-house Linux-based app, we can port that over, as well as continuing development through our SDK for our partners to be able to make really great solutions for us. And internally, we've done it too. We've done things like Blender and others just to test them and see how they work, and they work great. Porting over native Linux applications to run and be signed and work within the IGEL OS preventative security model is actually really not all that difficult for us. And then, of course, we manage it. And this is where we do things like our app portal, and we have our Insight, which allows us to get telemetry data from our IGEL devices, and of course our UMS 12, which I'll talk about in a little bit, how we manage all that and make it work together. But let me give you an example use case. In December, I did a webinar with Zscaler, one of our partners, talking about the VDI migration. Their solution is a really great one. And you might say this works great, or you might say VDI is great for us. But in their case, they were saying if you had VDI and you didn't want to use it everywhere because it wasn't right for your fit, you could move to their portal, secure through the web and delivery of applications to you on these devices, supported through their authentication mechanisms, supported through IDPs. Choose the IDP you want, choose the applications you want. Everything works natively out of the box. All of that centrally managed again with a local install or using our UD Pocket. So we can support VDI, we can support VDI migrations to application delivery in the cloud. It doesn't really matter to us. We're that neutral, we're the Switzerland of everybody. We have these partners that in some ways are competitive with each other, but in a lot of cases, you're never going to see a totally, homogeneous network. It's always going to be a little bit of patchwork of everything, and we want to support all of those use cases. So going back again to the secure OS for now and next, right? What are the key business drivers? Why is someone going to want to choose IGEL over, say Windows or Mac OS or trying to roll their own Linux on things? Well, it really comes down to security. And we've seen here now, security is the big push. Some of these operating systems are more secure than others, but managing them, making sure that they're hardened appropriately, but also making sure that they're usable for the end users, that's a very big challenge. It's very labor intensive, it's very cost intensive, it's very error prone. So what we've tried to do is take all of this and make it as simple to do as possible, and then deliver from that IGEL experience a very reduced cost. Right. In some cases, we're looking at 50 to 75% cost reduction over traditional Windows infrastructure. Then being able to deliver things we want through various different solutions. Like we've partnered with Island, secure enterprise browser recently. We have the Citrix enterprise browser. We have Chromium. We have Firefox. We have Edge. We have all the browsers you could ever want for delivery of SaaS platforms. And again, for DAS and VDI, we have all of the major vendors. We've listed Omnissa, Citrix, Microsoft. We support Parallels RAS, support WorkSpot. We support just about anyone who would want to deliver a desktop solution to you, even some of our new smaller partners that are joining our program. And we support it across all kinds of verticals. Healthcare, government, manufacturing, retail, financial services. We've got some really interesting use cases for this. And it's not just for end users. A lot of it is for things like OT and IoT. One of our key case studies is Audi, and they replaced a lot of their industrial PCs in their manufacturing with IGEL OS. And that IGEL OS is running those legacy applications through what they call their edge cloud for production. So there's a great case study out there, and we kind of look at how this works. But it's allowed them to use modern hardware, leverage power virtualization, leverage the power of being able to roll back and remediate that kind of data center type of function where you can put Windows and make it much more secure, but leaving the endpoint where it can be used by everybody and still be safe at the end of the day. So back to our IGEL app ecosystem. Right now we've got a little over 50 native partner apps. It's actually pushing about 70 right now. And like I said, this is for everybody. So if you're a Citrix shop, an Omnissa shop, Microsoft shop using Windows 365 or AVD, we support all that. Amazon Web Services. It doesn't matter to us. We are Switzerland. We want you to have the best experience ever. And it's not just those applications. We've put a tremendous amount of effort into working with hardware vendors to ensure that we have the broadest peripheral support, right? And that can be things like signature pads, scanners, printers, headsets. We've worked with companies like Vasion to introduce their the latest version of their Vasion Print app, so that printing is seamlessly into an IGEL environment through any of these delivery mechanisms is going to work fine for that. And you're going to see that here released on our App Store very, very shortly. But what we're trying to do here again is take the experience of any desktop, any app, anywhere, and make this as seamless as possible. It's always going to look the same. It's always going to feel the same. It's always going to be the same. And it's not just, again, those more desktop type devices. We even have an entire solution dedicated to replacing things like Dell Thin clients. One of the ironies is the most recent version of the Dell Thin OS is not really all that thin anymore. It requires 8 GB of RAM. It requires things. Dell doesn't tell you that. They go ahead and say, well, these models aren't supported anymore. But when you look at the commonality, it's all because they need 8 GB of RAM to run. They don't have that. We can still run on those. So some of the older Wise thin clients, you can just simply iGel it and they work. And so what you before were expecting a 5, 7, 10-year lifespan out of, you can actually get that with IGEL OS, which is much, much lighter when we look at it. So native applications, we run those too. Zoom, Teams, WebEx, we're continually adding applications to this. In fact, I'm going to show you what our IGEL ready ecosystem looks like right now. And it's massive. So whether it's Dex and SIM, whether it's IAM, whether it's SaaS apps, whether it's VDI, DAS and browser, it doesn't matter. Unified communication and collaboration, those are things that we're really pushing on now. So we're adding vendors very quickly to that space so that if you are running any number of different IP-based telephony solutions, collaboration solutions, all of those will run natively on IGEL OS. You don't have to push them to a VDI or run them through some other kind of mechanism. You can run them natively if you want, or again, using things like the Teams 2.0 plugin, you can run those through VDI as well. We don't care where those run. So great. So we know we have the broadest app ecosystem. We know we have the most secure operating system there is. How do we manage this? Well, it's really simple. So we have something we call UMS, right? And this is our Universal Management System. Version 12 is the current version. And on here, I got a couple of screenshots for this. And it's really just to show you what it looks like. So in our case here, we're able to take any number of applications that we've got. And in my case here, I have the Chromium browser, Firefox. I've got the IGEL agent for Imprivata for tap and go. I've got IGEL Remote Desktop and Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, all of those which we support. You can deploy those out in a very granular way. So using configurations, you can go ahead and set up exactly what you want the infrastructure to look like. Who gets what, who goes to what farms, who goes to what servers, how do you want this to look? You can set that up, and then you can customize and control what that looks like. So if you wanted an application to run, say you're at a bank and you want a teller software to run, and that's it, and it runs through a web browser, you could go ahead and configure, say, Chromium. You could have it run in kiosk mode, loading only that one device, and there's no keys to get out of it. This isn't like other operating systems that has things that you may not necessarily know, or hacks to get out of it and jailbreak into the operating system. If you want it to run in a kiosk mode, it runs in a kiosk mode. And that really gives us a lot of control over that. But if you said, I don't want Chromium, maybe I want the Island browser to run those applications, great. You can run that too. The user can see zero interaction if they want. A lot of times in healthcare, we also will set this up with an Imprivata workflow where the user will tap in, it'll go directly to, say, their Centrix infrastructure, loading their Epic HMR system. They don't even know it's IGEL. They don't know anything. They tap, it logs in, they never see anything, and it goes right to the workflow they want. And that's really what this is all about, right? This end user computing experience is about delivering exactly what they want in exactly the way they need to, and nothing else, right? It's the living embodiment of the principle of least privilege here. And we've really embraced that with IGEL. So let's talk about a couple of things real quick. One of those that we talk about a lot, and I've mentioned a few times, is that CapEx and OpEx. Not everyone had to live that. I had to live it for 15 years, justifying every single expense that I made. hardware costs, right? Laptops, desktops, thin clients, workstations, servers, all those capital expenditures that we had to put out, spending money for things, sometimes software, all the different tools we would have to layer on top of Windows. And then, of course, we have our operating expenses, all the personnel that's required to support that, all of the equipment, right? We can lease it if we want to. Sometimes we'd play games like converting capital expenditures to operating expenditures. But really, you're just robbing Peter to pay Paul, as the saying goes. You're not actually having any cost savings. But when we do it with an IGEL OS here, what we're really trying to do is lower those costs across the board. So this is kind of what our rethinking our strategy looks like. On the left here, we have our traditional endpoint, and it's going to require very powerful hardware, going to require an OS that requires a lot of storage, lots of applications, and lots of different agents that go on top of it. I've seen as many as 25 in the field, 25 different agents layered on top for everything from DLP to antivirus. But what we're trying to do is strip all those down because we don't need them with our preventative security model. And we don't need the same amount of hardware. So what we can do here is take this, right? These things that before were causing us this high expenses, these high performance hardware with really quick kind of life cycles, right? If you had a 5-year-old PC, it may not have the TPM 2.0 chip in it. You've already found out that that's the end of life for that system unless you repurpose it. You have these security agents, management agents, all of those add to this high capital expenditure cost on everything. And then high OpEx, right? Testing, patching, managing, monitoring, remediating, that whole old broken security model we talked about monitoring, detecting, and remediating. Being able to successfully deploy things like, again, I use 24H2. I keep beating on that one. But it's been bad. It's been very bad. It's been tough to deploy. It's had a lot of issues, and it's cost businesses a fortune in making it happen. At least in some ways, you can roll it back, but that may not always be the case. It could change with any build, and each build that we're seeing fixes one problem while introducing other ones. And these aren't small problems. These are problems affecting millions of users right now. So, what do we do with
All
this?
right. So, Jamie, I want to
Yeah,
break in here real quick. We have two questions in the Q&A panel.
perfect.
All right. And they're both from Mike. The first question is, how does IGEL fare against Chrome OS?
Great question. Great question. Chrome OS doesn't have the ecosystem we have, right? Chrome OS has really had this focus on number one being particular devices, right? Like Chromebooks and such, lower power devices that run it. Or even when you've had the Chrome OS that you can install itself on some legacy hardware, you're really tied to things like Google for their identity management and that ecosystem. We've really tried to shy away from that, right? While we will support Google and will support things like Chrome. We've tried to be that neutral arbiter. All of these vendors seem to be doing things like that, right? So, we've partnered with Microsoft, but they have kind of their own thin clienty thing, or they have their Windows app. Chrome OS is kind of the same way. You're leveraging Google end to end on this, and that really hasn't been something that has made a lot of sense to people. The limited enterprise manageability in my CTO world, one of the companies that I dealt with was a very large property management company, and they had deployed Chrome OS and Chromebooks to various different housing groups that they were managing in order to allow residents to have internet access and do things as part of their compliance. And it was very difficult to manage that and really get it where it was. And that was a real simple use case. That was deploying them out, getting them to use essentially just a Chrome browser and nothing else. But it really didn't have the kind of management and granularity that a business would expect. It may in the future, but right now it's simply not ready for prime time.
Okay. And then the second question, also from Mike, is can UMS do remote control and monitoring of endpoints?
Absolutely. Yes, we have the ability to securely shadow, and it's great because one of the security concerns that everyone has is how many ports do I have to open for all this to work? There's one port that we use, 8443. Everything goes through a WebSocket. back and forth between the devices and the UMS. And the UMS will allow that secure tunneling for everything. So you can do management scripting. You have inventory in there. We of course support all of our third-party manufacturers like our Control Ups, our EG Innovations, that all have solutions for DEX and for information about that. Our new Insight module gives those vendors as well a tremendous ability to get information on this. If you're using an Omnissa environment, the Workspace ONE will allow us to put those and enroll those in there. We support Intune even for enrollment, ironically, but you can have that in Intune portal. So for us, we have native management tools that are fantastic, but we also have the ability to leverage third parties that you might say my CISO or my other C-suite members have told us we have to use X, Y, or Z. No problem. We'll support that as well. So that makes it really nice for this. And while we're talking about the UMS, that reminds me, Sean, I didn't talk about this in the UMS slide. We don't license the UMS. The UMS is a free piece of our solution. You have to have IGEL OS, but the UMS is done that way because you may want to put it in the cloud. You may want it to be on-prem. We're introducing now UMS as a service as well. And of course, if you want to build high availability, we have an entire architecture training that tells you how to do that, right? So clustering your UMS, so you can have it wherever you want. You can have distributed UMSs, but we don't charge you anymore. It's not like if you want a high availability UMS, it's now going to cost you 10x or write us a check for $1 million. It doesn't work that way. The UMS is designed to make you get the most out of that endpoint OS, but we don't charge you anything for it. So it's a really cool thing that we do for management capability.
All right, thank you. And those were the only two questions we have. So I'll turn it back over to you to continue
Awesome.
with your
Awesome.
slides.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Mike. Those were great questions. Um, So let's talk about, all right, in the cost savings. You've heard me talk a lot about that. When I was a CTO, I had to actually live and die by spreadsheets and cost. So what we've done at IGEL is we've partnered with an industry-leading provider of ROI and TCO calculation. And what we've done is we've opened this up to our partners and we've opened this up to our customers. And what it allows us to do is collaboratively come up with solutions for you that you can then cost justify. So when I say things like a 50 to 75% savings, that's not just me pulling out numbers. That's based on real world data that we've been given by our partners and customers, right? So if I go to you as a customer and say, all right, you're a hospital and you have 40,000 endpoints. What does that look like to you? What does it cost you in personnel to manage it? What does it cost you in software licenses on that? What does it cost you in power, right? In those devices. And on a very large scale, this adds up extremely quickly. So what we do is we will build this cost calculation, and it's only as accurate as the data that you give us. And again, we don't need anything to be proprietary. If you don't know the information, we have some templates that we can use. But if you give us every single thing, down to what, here's my invoice for my XDR solution. Oh, here's my total pay range for all the employees in the IT staff. Or here's third-party consultants that I had to hire to make things work or to migrate to Windows 11. All of those things we will add up together and build this calculation for you. And again, just like our UMS, it doesn't cost anything. So when you talk to IGEL about this, we can go through and step through this calculation for you. And I've never seen it not make sense. But if it didn't make sense, wouldn't you want us to tell you? It's all based on your information. You can look at what our licensing cost looks like. You can look at what our support looks like. You can get everything that you need all transparently so that you know whether or not it makes economic sense. Because nowadays, even security, even though companies are throwing money at it, it's extremely difficult to cost justify that. So we've run into that problem, and we want to make sure that that cost justification is really easy for you. So here's one of those examples, right? And this was a customer, 3-year total. It's about $41 million was their original cost. And the 3-year benefits, we were able to get it down to about 6.6 million on this cost when we were looking at IGEL OS and the pieces of their ecosystem they could remove and risk mitigation. And if you see the risk mitigation in this example is kind of a strange one, right? It's okay. They're thinking it's probably 600,000. Okay. But as we look at some other examples, I'm just going to give a couple more so I don't bore you to death with ROI and TCO. Some of them are much higher because those companies already suffered things like ransomware attacks and ransomware mitigation was a big portion of it because they knew exactly how much it was going to cost them. So I'll give you this blinding slide here. This is an energy sector one that's 21,000 endpoints. And in fact, what we'll do is if you see on the left here where it says Universal Management Suite, IGEL OS, and IGEL Cloud Gateway, we can see that's a combination of not just our OS 12, but also some of the legacy OS 11 that they were going to be using for some of their pieces. They were a current customer, but we're looking to expand that footprint. So here we were able to look at, okay, what is the reduced hardware cost? What are we saving as far as the upgrades that might be required for certain PCs? Any kind of labor that was going to be required to upgrade those PCs? All of that there. And again, if you do this with iGel and you go through this process with us, you don't need to give us everything. We don't live in a vacuum. We know that some of you work for groups that are unionized. We don't even have to put in personnel information in this to do that. And you can still build those. So we're sensitive to those kinds of needs. But what we want to do is make sure that you give us the accurate information that gives you what you feel like is the best way to do this. But one of the things I like to do too is say this isn't just for large customers, right? Here we're talking about 40,000 endpoints, 21,000 endpoints. Let's look at a smaller financial customer, right? This is only 1,600 endpoints. And we were able to look at their cost and their biggest cost was labor, right? Upgrading 1,600 endpoints with Windows 11 and doing all that was cost prohibitive. I mean, it was massive. The cost to deploy Windows 11 was much more than the cost of the hardware out of the gate. And then, of course, things like ransomware recovery. Like you're going to see here, they have some pretty big risk mitigation and ransomware costs because they were actually hit with some ransomware. And I can tell you by looking at this, this is natively only in OS 12, which is our current version of the operating system. And that's what they're going to be using for this. So this information here can be used, and we can do everything down into what your average cost is and time for resolution on help desk and lost productivity on a per worker basis. All of that can be calculated by IGEL. So really, really great way to get that. And again, it doesn't cost anything. It's just how honest you are is how much you get out of it. So let me talk about one more thing before I transition it back to Sean, and thank everybody for being here. Next month, we have our big conference, right? We call that Now and Next. It used to be called Disrupt. We now call it Now and Next. It's going to be at the beautiful Fontainebleau in Miami Beach. I'm not going to pretend to be French and speak it in such a way that will impress you. It's going to be March 24th through 27th. So before it was a 2-day conference, it's 3, almost 4 days now. And we've introduced all kinds of different sessions to this. So we'd love everyone to come to that. And why really should you attend it? We're going to have, and it says 35 breakout sessions. We're actually pushing 80 breakout sessions now. So tremendous there. We have keynotes from everyone. All right, Omnissa, Microsoft, partners in the field, partners that are and customers that have seen this work. Everyone from healthcare to financial services to military and government are going to be there to do this. We're going to have special tracks for security. We're going to have boot camps and workshops. I'm actually helping with some of the boot camps myself, and those are solid 90-minute, 120-minute work that we can do there. We're also going to have all kinds of different special tracks for very specific targeted functions that you might want, right? So you can go to our website, you can register it for it. It's really great. What we're also going to do there is a lot of people say, I know IGEL OS, I've started using it, or maybe you do use it and you haven't gone all the way with things like certification. The IGEL Academy, we're going to have our certification programs going on there. So things like IGEL Foundations, our IGEL Certified Professional, our Certified Engineer, and we have our brand new ICA certification. We had that for version 11. I just did the version 12 one. It's fantastic. If you want to look at all the different ways of best practices for how to build profiles, best practices for geographically distributed UMS. So if you have slow WAN links or you want redundancy in different geographicals, all of that is covered in it, and it's a really fantastic one. And there's one more thing. We have a special guest, right? So we haven't been promoting this on social media and doing those things because we want people to come to the conference because it's really the best conference there is of this type. But we're going to have the man himself, the Mr. Bombastic. It wasn't me, Shaggy. So at the Live nightclub in Fontainebleau, we will be doing a special event where Shaggy himself will be doing a concert for us. So really great experience, kind of way to kind of cap off that Miami experience with us, and to really have a great time with us. Learn a ton about IGEL. Meet others who are doing the same things you're doing or looking at the same challenges you are. Meet all kinds of different partners that can provide solutions for you, and of course, just have a great time coming out, meeting, and listening to some great music. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Sean, if there's no questions.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions. So before I switch back to do our wrap up, are there any other questions for Jamie? All right, so I'm not seeing anything, but if you do have any in the next like minute or two, please put them in the Q&A panel and we will get them addressed before we wrap up. And then, so to Uh, just a couple of closing notes here. Jamie just finished talking about IGEL Now and Next, which is coming up next month. Um, Also, World of EUC has our conference, EUC World Amplify, that will be the first week of August, August 4th to 7th in Minneapolis. So we would love to have you attend that event, as well as attend IGEL's Now and Next conference in Miami. But that's not the only thing that we have, right? So for joining our webinar today, you did join World of EUC. So we have monthly webinars, we have a video library, we have blogs, we have our podcast, and we have more stuff that we're continuing to develop with our partners like IGEL and our other sponsors. So check out worldofeuc.org. Make sure you join our Slack channel if you're not already a part of it, and just keep an eye out for everything that we're doing. Now, we do have a giveaway for today's webinar, and the winner of the free T-shirt is Stan Laffrey. So Stan, congratulations. You have won a World of EUC t-shirt, and we will be in touch with you shortly to get your address so we can send that to you. Now, one last thing I forgot to mention about EUC World. I'll go back here for a second. The QR code in the corner will take you to the page to learn more about the event. But it's also just worldofeuc.org/EUC World 2025. And we are running a special right now on event passes. Those event passes are $100 through tomorrow to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of EUC or of World of EUC. So if you are thinking about going, now is the time to register to get access to this special discount. After tomorrow, the price will go back up to, I believe, $150 for the event pass. So, and with that, that is all I have for you. So, Jamie, thank you for joining us today to talk about IGEL and the challenges of migrating to Windows 7 and how IGEL can help solve some of them. It was a very informative session. I'm glad you were able to join us for this webinar today. And with that, uh, uh, yeah, have a great day. Thank you for
Thank you so
joining,
much.
everyone.
Yeah, I heard Windows 7 there. I was getting excited for nostalgia.
I thought I said Windows 11, but 7, 11.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
close,
thank heaven.
close enough. I miss Windows 7 tremendously, but that's all right. So, but awesome. Thank you for having me, Sean, Jen, World of EUC. Really great to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.